What if a single sentence spoken in the right language at the right time could topple a $500 million empire? In a glittering Manhattan skyscraper, inside a private dining room, where deals are made, a titan of industry, Dominic Sterling is about to close the deal of a lifetime. He slides a document across the polished mahogany table to his Japanese investors, a confident smile playing on his lips. He explains the final clause, a simple formality. But just as the pen is about to hit the paper, a quiet voice from the corner of the room cuts through the air. It's the waitress, a young woman just there to pour the water. And in perfect fluent Japanese, she says 5 words that will ignite a firestorm. That's not what it says. The air in the private dining room of the Gilded Compass, perched 63 floors above the sprawling lights of Manhattan, was thick with the scent of money, not the crisp papery smell of new bills, but the more rarefied aroma of power, a blend of aged leather, expensive cologne, and the subtle hint of truffle oil from the untouched appetizers. Maya Rodriguez knew that scent well. For the past 8 months, it had been the backdrop to her life, a constant reminder of the world she served, but could never touch. Tonight the air was practically electric. The guest of honor was Dominic Sterling, the charismatic CEO of Auragen Innovations, a man whose face was plastered on magazine covers, lauded as a visionary, bringing clean, sustainable energy to the world. His smile was a weapon, his handshake a contract. Tonight he was using both to their full effect on his guests, a trio of executives from the Tanaka Corporation, a Tokyo-based conglomerate known for its cautious but colossal investments. At the head of their delegation was Mr. Kenji Tanaka, a man in his late 60s with a face as serene as a Zen garden and eyes that held the shrewdness of a hawk. He and his 2 younger associates, Mr. Ito and Mr. Yamamoto, listened intently as Sterling, through his interpreter, painted a glorious picture of the future, the Helios project in Nevada. It's not just a solar farm, gentlemen, Sterling said, his voice a smooth baritone that commanded attention. It's a paradigm shift. Our patented energy storage solution will revolutionize the grid. Your investment of $500 million isn't just a purchase of equity. It's the key that unlocks a $1 trillion industry. Maya moved silently around the table, refilling water glasses with a practiced, almost invisible grace. Her uniform, a simple black dress with a starched white apron, was a cloak of anonymity. To these men, she was part of the furniture, a silent functionary. They didn't know that she had spent 4 years at Kyoto University on a full linguistic scholarship, that she could read and write 3 forms of Japanese script, that she had once dreamed of being a UN interpreter before her family's financial collapse had dragged her back home and into this life of servitude. She listened with one ear as she worked. The interpreter, a slick man in a suit a size too small, relayed Sterling's pitch in formal, if slightly stiff Japanese. Mr. Tanaka nodded, asking pointed questions about efficiency ratios and long-term maintenance costs, which the interpreter translated back to Sterling. The main course came and went, seared scallops and Wagyu beef that cost more than Maya's weekly salary. Finally, as dessert was cleared, Sterling's personal aide, a nervous young man named Peter, entered and placed a single leather-bound folder in front of his boss. The climax. "Gentlemen," Sterling announced, his smile widening. "The final agreement. Everything we've discussed. All the projections, all the guarantees solidified." He opened the folder and pushed it towards Mr. Tanaka. "It's in both English and Japanese, of course. Our teams have been working on this for weeks." Mr. Tanaka and his colleagues leaned forward, their faces serious. They began to read the Japanese version on the right-hand side of the page. Maya was clearing the last of the dessert plates near Mr. Yamamoto when her eyes inadvertently flickered down to the document. It was dense, filled with legal kanji. But a particular clause in the final addendum, Section C, Paragraph 4, caught her eye. Sterling, ever the showman, decided to narrate the finale. Now, the final clause there, Section C, is just a standard liability transfer. It states that upon closing this deal, Origen assumes all operational control and naturally all profits generated by the Helios project from this day forward. A formality, really. The interpreter dutifully relayed this in Japanese. Saishu jokose setsu wa hyojun teki na sekinin iten desu. Tozen no koto nagara Auragen ga une jo no subete no tosei o hikiukeru koto o shimeshite imasu. The final clause. Section C is a standard liability transfer. It naturally indicates that Origen will assume all operational control. But Maya had just read the clause. Her heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the quiet room. Her mind raced, rereading the complex characters, convinced she must be mistaken. She wasn't. Mr. Tanaka nodded slowly, his hand reaching for the ornate fountain pen resting beside the folder. He seemed satisfied. This was it. The moment a $500 million deal would be signed based on a lie. Maya felt a cold dread wash over her. This was not her business. Her job was to pour water-clear plates and say, "Enjoy your meal." Getting involved would mean career suicide. She would be fired instantly, blacklisted from every high-end establishment in the city. She could lose everything, which she thought with a bitter laugh wasn't much. But then she thought of her father, a small business owner who had been ruined by a man just like Sterling, a man who had used deceptive contracts and a silver tongue to swindle him out of his life savings. The memory was a hot coal in her gut. Mr. Tanaka uncapped the pen. The small click echoed in the silent room. Maya's training her instincts, her fear all screamed at her to stay silent. But the words were already forming on her tongue, pushing their way out. She took a half step forward, her knuckles white where she gripped the empty water pitcher. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the charged atmosphere like a razor. She spoke in perfect formal Japanese. "Tanaka-sama moshiwake gozaimasen ga, soko ni wa so kaite arimasen." The three Japanese men froze. "Mr." Tanaka's hand holding the pen hovered an inch above the paper. Sterling and his interpreter looked up, confused by the interruption. Sterling's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. Who was this waitress to speak, out of turn? Mr. Ito turned his head slowly to look at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. He asked in Japanese, "What did you say?" Maya's heart hammered against her chest. But her voice was steady now, infused with a certainty that surprised even herself. She looked directly at Mr. Tanaka, ignoring the growing storm on Dominic Sterling's face. I said she repeated her Japanese flawless, "My deepest apologies, Mr. Tanaka." But that's not what it says. Silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a concluded meal, but a brittle, suffocating silence that stretched into an eternity. 6 pairs of eyes were fixed on Maya. Sterling's were turning from confusion to a cold, hard fury. Tanaka's were narrowed, not with anger, but with intense, unnerving curiosity. It was Dominic Sterling who broke the spell. "What the hell is going on?" he snapped, looking at his interpreter. "What did she say?" The interpreter, pale and flustered, stammered, She spoke to them in Japanese, sir. I don't." Mr. Tanaka ignored them completely. He kept his gaze locked on Maya. In a calm, measured tone, he asked her a question in his native tongue. "Anata wa nani o yomimashita ka?" What did you read before? Maya could answer. Sterling slammed his palm flat on the table, the sharp crack making everyone jump. "Peter, get her out of here." Now I am so sorry, gentlemen. A disgruntled employee. We have security for this. Peter, the young aide scurried forward, his face a mask of panic. Miss, you need to come with me. Right now. But Maya stood her ground. All the fear that had been churning in her stomach had now crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. She had already stepped off the cliff. She might as well see where she landed. It says, Maya said, still speaking Japanese, and pointing a trembling finger at the document, that upon signing, Tanaka Corporation assumes all outstanding debt and liability for the Helios project's infrastructure retroactive to its inception, and that Aura-Gen Innovations is indemnified against any and all pre-existing structural or financial failures. She paused, then delivered the final devastating blow. It transfers all the risk to you and none of the profit guarantees Sterling mentioned. A collective sharp intake of breath came from the Japanese delegation. Mr. Yamamoto snatched the document and read the clause aloud, his voice shaking with anger. It was exactly as Maya had said. The language was dense, wrapped in layers of legalese, but the meaning was unmistakable. It wasn't a liability transfer, it was a poison pill. Sterling's face had drained of all color. He didn't need to understand Japanese to read the horror and fury on his investors' faces. He stared at Maya, his eyes promising a world of pain. "You're fired," he hissed in English, his voice low and venomous. "You have no idea what you've just done." Mr. Tanaka rose slowly from his chair, his regal calm now replaced by an icy contempt. He folded his hands behind his back and gave Dominic Sterling a look that could freeze fire. "Sterling-san," he said, his voice dangerously soft. His interpreter, now sweating profusely, scrambled to translate. "It appears our understanding of this partnership has been fundamentally flawed. We are withdrawing our offer. This meeting is over." Without another word, he and his colleagues turned and walked towards the door, bowing stiffly to Maya as they passed. It was a gesture of profound respect, a gesture that signed Dominic Sterling's social and financial death warrant in that room. The moment the door clicked shut, Sterling's facade of control shattered. He swept his arm across the table, sending crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and the $500 million contract crashing to the floor. "Peter," he roared, his face purple with rage. "Get security, get her out of my sight, and get Gavin Price on the phone." Now 2 burly security guards materialized and grabbed Maya by the arms. They were rough, their grips bruising. As they dragged her from the room, her eyes met Sterling's one last time. The look he gave her wasn't just anger. It was a promise that this was far from over. She was frog-marched through the bustling kitchen, past the shocked faces of her co-workers, and unceremoniously shoved out a back-alley door into the cold, damp New York night. The door slammed shut behind her, the lock clicking with a definitive finality. She stood there for a moment, her thin uniform, no match for the biting wind, the smell of garbage and rain filling her lungs. Her purse, her phone, her keys. All were still inside. She had just saved a company from a $500 million scam, and all she had to show for it was the looming shadow of a ruined billionaire and the very real possibility that she had just destroyed her own life. Alone in the alley, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, gut-wrenching fear. What had she done? The answer lay 4 years in the past, in a small traditional wooden house in Kyoto. Maya had been the star of her university's exchange program, her fluency in Japanese, so natural that she often dreamt in it. She had lived with a host family, the Nakamuras, who treated her like a daughter. Mr. Nakamura was a master calligrapher, and he taught her the art of the written word, the nuance and soul behind each kanji character. A single stroke, Maya-chan, he would say, his brush poised over the delicate rice paper, can change the meaning of everything. It can turn a promise into a lie. Her life then was a sun-drenched dream. Her future was bright with offers from top translation firms already coming in. Then came the call from home. Her father's construction supply business, a company he'd built from the ground up for 30 years, had gone bankrupt. A major developer, a smooth-talking man with a gleaming smile and ironclad contracts, had lured him into a massive project, only to bury him in altered clauses and impossible deadlines, forcing him to default, and then buying his assets for pennies on the dollar. The stress had triggered a heart attack. Her father survived, but his spirit and their family's finances were broken. Maya had abandoned her dreams and flown home. The girl who once debated international policy in fluent Japanese found herself clearing plates for men who wouldn't even make eye contact with her. The ghost of Kyoto, of the life she was supposed to have haunted her every shift. Until tonight. Standing in that alley shivering, Maya finally understood Mr. Nakamura's lesson. A few strokes of a pen on a page, a promise turned into a lie. Tonight she had been the one to see it, and she had spoken up. The ghost of her father's ruin had given her the courage, and the ghost of Kyoto had given her the words. She had no idea what Dominic Sterling was capable of, but as she wrapped her arms around herself, a tiny defiant spark ignited within her. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. The next 24 hours were a blur of disorientation and fear. After a humiliating walk to a friend's apartment to borrow a phone and call her roommate Maya, finally got back to her tiny Brooklyn walk-up. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old building, every siren in the distance sent a jolt of panic through her. Dominic Sterling's face, contorted in rage, was burned into her memory. The following afternoon, her phone buzzed. It was a text from her former manager at the Gilded Compass. "Your personal effects are in a box at the service entrance. Do not come inside. Do not contact anyone here again." A second text followed. It was a wire service notification of a news alert. Auragen Innovations and Tanaka Corp deal hits unforeseen snag. Sterling cites cultural misunderstandings. Cultural misunderstandings. The corporate speak was so bland, so sterile it made her sick. They were trying to bury it, to smooth it over. But the deal was on hold, not dead. Sterling was still fighting, which meant he still saw her as a threat. 2 days later, the knock on her apartment door came. It wasn't the police, and it wasn't a process server. It was a man who looked like he had been sculpted from polished granite and tailored wool. He was in his late 40s with silvering temples, an impeccably tailored suit, and a thin, bloodless smile. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice as smooth and cold as river stones. "My name is Gavin Price. I'm an attorney representing Mr. Sterling." Maya's blood ran cold. This was the man Sterling had called for, the fixer. "I don't have anything to say to you." She tried to close the door, but he inserted a polished leather shoe, blocking it. "I think you do," Price said, his smile never wavering. He wasn't pushing, but the quiet pressure was more menacing than a shove. "May I come in? It would be a shame to discuss your future on a public landing." Reluctantly, she let him in. He surveyed her small, cluttered apartment with a look of faint disdain before settling on her worn-out sofa as if it might contaminate him. "Let's be direct, Miss Rodriguez. You've created a significant inconvenience for my client, a very expensive inconvenience. Your client is a liar and a thief." Maya shot back, her fear making her bold. Price chuckled a dry, humorless sound. "Semantics. In our world it's called aggressive negotiation. You, on the other hand, have engaged in what could be construed as tortious interference, not to mention the violation of a dozen confidentiality clauses in your employment contract. I don't have a contract that says I have to let your boss rob people blind." "That's where you're mistaken," Price said, leaning forward. "You have no platform, no credibility. You are a waitress. He is Dominic Sterling. Who do you think the world will believe he can spend the next 10 years burying you in litigation? You'll be bankrupt before the first deposition. Your name will be dragged through the mud. Every future employer will see you as a troublemaker, a liability." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You'll be unemployable, a pariah." The threat was clear, and it was terrifyingly real. Everything he said was true. Or Price continued, his voice softening. "We can make this all go away. Mr. Sterling is a generous man. He recognizes that this was all a misunderstanding, a result of your youthful idealism." He placed a thick manila envelope on her coffee table. Inside is a severance agreement and a cashier's check for $250,000. Maya stared at the envelope. $250,000. It was more money than she had ever seen. It could solve everything. It could pay off her family's remaining medical debts, get her out of this shoebox apartment, let her finish her degree. It was a ticket back to the life that had been stolen from her. All she had to do was sign a piece of paper. A non-disclosure agreement, a retraction of her statement, a promise to disappear. "The agreement simply states that you misread the document," Price explained calmly. "That you were mistaken, and you regret the confusion you caused. You sign it, you take the money, and you never speak of this again. You get to start over. A clean slate." She looked from the envelope to Gavin Price's cold, expectant eyes. She thought of her father's defeated face. She thought of Mr. Tanaka's bow of respect. Taking that money would be a betrayal of both. It would mean that Sterling was right, that everyone and everything had a price. It would mean that her integrity, the one thing they couldn't take from her, was for sale. Slowly, deliberately, she slid the envelope back across the table. No. Price's smile finally vanished. The mask of civility dropped, revealing the predator beneath. "You are making a grave mistake, Miss Rodriguez. $250,000 is the carrot. I assure you, you do not want to see the stick. Get out of my apartment." He stood up, adjusting his tie. "Very well. We have nothing further to discuss." He walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "A word of advice. Watch where you walk. New York is a dangerous city. Accidents happen every day." The door closed, leaving Maya alone in the silence. The threat lingered in the air like poison. This was no longer just about her job or her reputation. Sterling was playing for keeps. The fear was back, colder and sharper than before, but now it was mixed with something else, a burning, righteous anger. She had to fight back. But how Price was right. She was a waitress. She had no money, no power, no platform. Sterling and his army of lawyers would crush her. She needed an ally. Someone who wasn't afraid of men like Dominic Sterling. Someone whose entire profession was dedicated to taking them down. Her mind raced through the news articles she'd read about Sterling over the years. Most were puff pieces fawning over his genius, but she remembered one a few years back. A deeply researched, critical investigation into Origen's early funding, questioning their environmental claims. It was a lone voice of dissent in a chorus of praise. The byline was a name she had committed to memory, at the time, impressed by the writer's tenacity: Robert Chen, an investigative reporter for the New York Chronicle. It was a long shot. He was probably inundated with tips and crackpot stories every day. Why would he listen to her? But it was the only shot she had. With trembling hands, she found her laptop, opened a search engine, and started digging. She had to find him. She had to make him believe her. Her life might just depend on it. Finding Robert Robbie Chen wasn't hard. His professional email was listed on the New York Chronicle's website. The hard part was crafting a message that wouldn't sound like the ravings of a lunatic. She spent 2 hours writing and rewriting a short, concise email, subject urgent, tip regarding Dominic Sterling and Aura-Gen Innovations. Mr. Chen. My name is Maya Rodriguez. I am the reason the Aura-Gen Tanaka Corp deal was halted. I have first-hand information about fraudulent clauses in the contract. Dominic Sterling is trying to silence me. I read your 2022 article on Aura-Gen's questionable environmental impact reports and believe you are the only person who will take this seriously. Please, I need your help. Maya Rodriguez. She hit send, her heart pounding. The response she figured would take days if it came at all. It came in 17 minutes from robert.chenanychronicle.com. Subject re-urgent. Tip regarding Dominic Sterling and Aura-Gen Innovations. Where and when they met the next morning at a noisy, nondescript coffee shop in Hell's Kitchen, far from the polished towers of Midtown. Robbie Chen was nothing like she'd imagined. He looked less like a hard-hitting journalist and more like a perpetually exhausted graduate student. He was wiry with glasses that were constantly slipping down his nose and a mess of black hair that looked like he'd been pulling at it all night. He nursed a large black coffee like it was a life support system. Miss Rodriguez, he said, not bothering with pleasantries, you made some big claims in your email. Let's hear it, from the top, and don't leave anything out. His tone was skeptical, bordering on dismissive. Maya realized he was testing her, waiting for her story to fall apart. She took a deep breath and began. She recounted every detail of the dinner at the Gilded Compass, the atmosphere, Sterling's speech, the exact wording of the clause. She'd read the reaction of Mr. Tanaka Sterling's violent outburst and being thrown out into the alley. Then she told him about Gavin Price, the visit, the $250,000, offer the veiled threats. As she spoke, she watched Robbie's face. He was listening, but his expression remained unreadable. He didn't take a single note. When she finished, he took a long sip of his coffee. Okay, he said. So let me get this straight. You, a waitress, happened to be fluent in legal Japanese, happened to be in the room for a $500 million deal, and happened to spot a poison pill clause that everyone else missed. Yes, Maya said, her voice firm. That's what happened. And now Sterling's top lawyer, Gavin Price, and trust me, I know who he is, personally visited you to offer you $250,000 in hush money, which you, a person who probably makes less than 40 grand a year, turned down out of the goodness of your heart. I didn't do it for free, Maya retorted, a flash of anger cutting through her fear. I did it because it was the right thing to do. My father was ruined by a man like Sterling. Robbie leaned back, steepling his fingers. It's a great story. It's a Hollywood story. But it's just that, a story. You have no proof. No recording of Price's offer. No copy of the contract. It's your word, the word of a fired waitress against a beloved tech billionaire and his entire legal team. I can't print a story based on that. Desperation clawed at Maya's throat. But it's true. Every word of it. Truth isn't enough, Robbie said, his voice laced with the weariness of 1,000 failed leads. You need evidence. Hard, undeniable documentary evidence. Without it, I'm just printing libel, and Sterling will own this newspaper before the ink is dry. He started to gather his things. I'm sorry, Miss Rodriguez. I believe that you believe what you're saying, but I can't help you. He was dismissing her. After everything, he was just going to walk away. Panic seized her. Wait, she called out, her voice sharp. The kanji. I remember the kanji. Robbie stopped 1 foot out of the booth. He looked at her, a flicker of interest in his tired eyes. What are you talking about? The clause, the indemnification clause. It was dense, but there was a specific corporate name referenced. It wasn't Origen. She closed her eyes, picturing the document, the elegant, complex strokes of the characters Mr. Nakamura had taught her to appreciate. It was something like Kagemusha. Kagemusha Holdings, LLC. She scribbled the characters on a napkin, for him, Kagemusha. It means shadow warrior, in Japanese, she explained. A decoy or a body double. I remember thinking it was an odd name for a holding company. Robbie stared at the napkin. He pulled out his phone and typed the name into a search engine. His cynical demeanor began to crack, replaced by the focused intensity of a predator catching a scent. Kagemusha Holdings. El Sisio, he muttered, scrolling. Registered in Delaware 6 months ago. No listed officers, just a registration agent. It's a ghost company, a shell corporation. He looked up at Maya, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of belief in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A random waitress wouldn't just invent the name of a specific obscure shell corporation and its correct Japanese translation. This isn't proof, Robbie said, his voice, now lower, more conspiratorial. But it's a thread. A very interesting thread. If Sterling was transferring liability for the Helios project, he had to transfer it to something. If Kagemusha Holdings is that something, and we can link it back to him. He sat back down, his coffee forgotten. He pulled a small notepad and a pen from his jacket. Okay, Maya, he said, and the use of her first name felt like a victory. Let's go back to the top. Tell me everything again. And this time he clicked his pen. I'm taking notes. For the next 2 hours the coffee shop faded away. It was just the two of them, a fired waitress and a cynical reporter piecing together the first fragments of a conspiracy. Maya provided the key, the memory of a single word. Robbie, with his years of experience investigating corporate malfeasance, knew which doors that key might unlock. He explained that the Helios project was Sterling's flagship. Origen's stock price was entirely dependent on its success. If there was a fundamental flaw with the project, and Sterling knew about it, he'd have a $500 million motive to pass the liability to an unsuspecting investor before the whole thing collapsed. Kagemusha Holdings was the vehicle for that toxic debt. This is bigger than just a fraudulent contract, Robbie said, a grim excitement in his voice. This is securities fraud, a massive criminal deception. If we can prove this, we can burn his entire empire to the ground. He looked at her, his expression serious. But I need to be clear. If we do this, if we start pulling on this thread, Sterling and his people will come after us. Not just with lawyers, but with everything they've got. They'll dig into your life, your family, your past. They will try to destroy you, to discredit you. Are you ready for that? Maya thought of Gavin Price's cold eyes and his thinly veiled threat. They were already coming for her. Her only choice was whether to hide or to fight. I'm ready, she said, her voice not wavering. What's our first move? Robbie smiled, a true, genuine smile this time. Our first move, he said, tapping the napkin with the Japanese characters, is to find out what our shadow warrior is hiding. The hunt began. Robbie's newsroom at the Chronicle became their war room, a cluttered space smelling of stale coffee and old paper that felt safer than Maya's apartment. Robbie worked his sources, diving into the labyrinthine world of corporate registrations and financial filings. Maya, meanwhile, became his secret weapon. Her linguistic skills and eidetic memory for the contract's details were invaluable. Their first target was Kagemusha Holdings, LLC. As Robbie had discovered, it was a Delaware shell corporation, making it notoriously difficult to trace its ownership. "It's a black box," Robbie explained, pointing to a complex diagram he'd drawn on a whiteboard. "Delaware law allows for near total anonymity, but someone had to file the paperwork. Someone had to pay the registration fees. There's always a trail. It's just faint. He spent days on the phone, calling in favors from old contacts, from disillusioned paralegals to bitter ex-regulators. The initial trail led to a corporate services firm in Wilmington, a company that existed solely to act as a registered agent for thousands of such shell companies. It was a dead end. Frustration began to set in. Maya felt a growing sense of dread. What if this was all for nothing? What if Sterling was too smart? His tracks, too well covered, Gavin Price's threat echoed in her mind. Every time she walked down the street, she found herself looking over her shoulder. One evening, while poring over Aura Jen's quarterly reports, dense, mind-numbing documents Maya was helping to cross-reference, she noticed a footnote. It mentioned a one-time consulting fee of $2.5 million paid to an entity called Argent Advisory Group for geological surveying and risk assessment related to the Helios project. "Robbie, look at this," she said, pointing to the line item. "Argent Advisory. Does that name mean anything to you?" Robbie's eyes lit up. Argent. Silver. Like sterling silver. Dominic is an egomaniac. It's exactly the kind of clever, stupid name he'd come up with. He started typing furiously. Argent Advisory Group, registered in Nevada, the same state as the Helios project. Let's see who the officers are. A few clicks later, a name appeared on the screen. The sole managing partner of Argent Advisory Group was listed as Gavin Price. "Bingo," Robbie whispered. "Sterling is using his own lawyer's firm to pay himself a consulting fee from his own company. It's a classic way to siphon money out." But why, what risk was he assessing? This was their first concrete link, their first piece of hard evidence connecting Sterling's inner circle to a questionable financial transaction related to the project. It was the crack in the dam. Their focus shifted from corporate records to the Helios project itself. On paper, it was a marvel. A sprawling solar array in the Nevada desert, using a revolutionary molten salt storage technology that promised power 24/7. But Robbie's initial article had already raised questions about its efficiency. Now they needed to know what was really happening on the ground. Robbie found a disgruntled former engineer who had worked on the project, a man named Frank Miller, who had been fired for insubordination. After a series of encrypted emails, Frank agreed to a video call, his face pixelated and his voice disguised. "The project is a lemon," Frank's distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "The storage tech. It never worked as advertised. The salt crystallizes at lower than expected temperatures. We had containment breaches, massive corrosion. The maintenance costs are astronomical. It's a money pit, not a power plant." "Can you prove this?" Robbie asked, his heart racing. "I signed so many NDAs I can't even sneeze without getting sued," Frank said. "But I might have kept copies of some internal progress reports, the ones before marketing got their hands on them and turned lead into gold. For my own protection." Getting those reports was risky. Frank was terrified, convinced Sterling's people were monitoring him. After a tense negotiation, he agreed to leave a USB drive hidden at a pre-arranged dead drop location in Las Vegas. "I can't go," Robbie said grimly. "I'm a known quantity. If Sterling has PIs watching me, they'll follow me to Vegas and spook Frank. We'd lose our only inside source." He looked at Maya. "They're looking for a journalist. They're not looking for a waitress." The idea was terrifying. But Maya knew he was right. She was anonymous. She could fly to Vegas, rent a car, and pick up the drive without raising any red flags. 2 days later, She was driving a rented Hyundai through the shimmering heat of the Nevada desert. Following Frank's cryptic instructions, she found a dusty abandoned gas station off a lonely stretch of highway. Taped to the underside of a rusty old tire behind the station was a small plain envelope. Inside was the USB drive. Back in her cheap motel room, she plugged the drive into her laptop, her hands shaking. It was a treasure trove. Dozens of internal reports, emails, and technical readouts, all detailing the catastrophic failures Frank had described. They had been deliberately falsifying their public reports to shareholders and investors. The Helios project wasn't just underperforming. It was a complete and utter fraud. The $500 million from Tanaka Corp wasn't for expansion. It was a desperate cash infusion to plug the financial holes, and more importantly, to transfer the ticking time bomb of liability before it exploded. Kagemusha Holdings was the legal entity they'd created to secretly hold all the project's toxic debt. The plan was to have Tanaka Corp assume liability from Kagemusha, in the fine print, thinking they were dealing directly with Aura Gen. Maya immediately encrypted the files and sent them to Robbie. His reply came moments later. "We've got him. We have the motive, the method, and the proof. Sterling is finished." A wave of relief washed over her, so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. They had done it. But her relief was short-lived. As she was packing to leave for the airport, there was a sharp knock on her motel room door. She froze. It was late. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Housekeeping," a man's voice called out. It was almost 11 p.m. Housekeeping wouldn't be coming at this hour. She crept to the peephole and looked out. Her blood turned to ice. Standing in the hallway was not a motel employee. It was a large, stone-faced man in a dark suit. And just behind him, she could see the silhouette of a second man. They weren't there to clean the room. They knew she was there. They had followed her. Panic, cold, and absolute gripped Maya. The flimsy door and its cheap lock felt like tissue paper against the men waiting outside. They knocked again, harder this time. "Miss Rodriguez, we know you're in there. Open the door. We just want to talk." The voice was calm, reasonable, and that made it even more terrifying. This wasn't a random attack. It was targeted. They were Sterling's men. The stick Gavin Price had promised. Her mind raced. The window. It faced the back of the motel, a dusty lot filled with dumpsters. It was a one-story building, a drop of maybe 7 or 8 feet. She grabbed her laptop bag, the original USB was still inside, and her purse, and quietly unlatched the window. It slid open with a groan. "Miss Rodriguez, don't make this difficult," the voice called, followed by the sound of a keycard sliding into the lock. They must have gotten it from the front desk. She didn't hesitate. She threw her bags out, then scrambled through the opening, dropping awkwardly onto the hard-packed dirt below, scraping her hands and knees. The lock on her door clicked open. She didn't look back. She sprinted across the dark lot, vaulted over a low chain-link fence, and ran. She ran until her lungs burned her only direction, away from the motel towards the distant glow of the Las Vegas Strip. She found a 24-hour casino, ducked into a crowded ladies' room, and locked herself in a stall, trying to quiet her ragged breathing. She was shaking uncontrollably. They had found her. How had they found her? The burner phone, a tracker on the rental car. It didn't matter. The message was clear, there was nowhere she could hide. She called Robbie from a new burner phone she bought for cash at a casino gift shop. "They found me." "Robbie," she whispered, her voice trembling. They were at the motel. 2 of them. There was a string of curses on the other end of the line. "Maya, are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm safe. For now. I have the drive. But they know. They know we have the proof. Then we have to move now. Robbie said, his voice tight with urgency. Before they can bury it, or us. Sterling is holding a press conference tomorrow morning at Gen Tower. He's going to announce a restructured deal with a different investment group to create a bidding war and pressure Tanaka. He's trying to control the narrative. We're going to hijack it. What are you talking about? I'm publishing the story tonight. Online. Everything. The shell company, the fraudulent reports, Frank's testimony. It'll go live at 5 a.m. Eastern. By the time Sterling steps up to that podium, the world will know he's a fraud. And you and I are going to be there. Go there. Are you insane? His men are actively looking for me. It's the safest place for you to be, Robbie countered. In public. In a room full of cameras and journalists. They can't touch you there. We're not just going to expose him with an article. We're going to confront him. Face to face. The plan was audacious, reckless, and utterly terrifying. It was also their only move. Sterling had cornered them. The only way out was to charge straight ahead. Maya spent the night on a bus back to Los Angeles, then took the first red-eye flight to New York's JFK, buying her ticket under a different name with cash. She landed as the sun was rising over Queens, exhausted and running on pure adrenaline. She met Robbie outside the Chronicle building. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but his eyes were blazing with a fierce light. It's live, he said, showing her his phone. The headline was stark. Aura bogus investigation reveals billionaire Dominic Sterling's green energy empire is a $500 million house of cards. The story was exploding online. By the time they took a taxi to Midtown, it was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. They walked into the gleaming, cavernous lobby of Gen Tower. It was swarming with reporters and camera crews, all buzzing about the bombshell report. No one paid any attention to the tired-looking journalist and the young woman in a simple, nondescript dress. They were invisible in the chaos they had created. The press conference was in a large auditorium. They found 2 seats in the back as the room filled up. Maya's heart was a trip hammer against her ribs. Then she saw them. Across the room near the stage stood Gavin Price, his face a thundercloud, and flanking the exits were the 2 men from the motel in Nevada. They were scanning the crowd, their eyes like searchlights. A few minutes later, a murmur went through the room. On the other side of the auditorium, a small, quiet delegation was being shown to a reserved row of seats. It was Mr. Kenji Tanaka and his 2 associates. They had flown back to New York. Robbie must have tipped them off. Tanaka's face was unreadable, but his presence was a statement. He was here to witness the fallout. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. And then Dominic Sterling walked onto the stage. He looked flawless in a dark, tailored suit, his famous smile firmly in place. But Maya could see the tension in his jaw, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. He was a performer, and this was the performance of his life. He tapped the microphone. "Good morning," he began, his voice smooth as ever. "I know there are a lot of unsubstantiated rumors flying around this morning based on a piece of journalistic fiction. But I am here to talk about the future." He launched into his speech, a masterclass in deflection and corporate spin. He never mentioned the Chronicle article by name, but he dismissed its anonymous sources and misinterpreted data. He talked about vision, about innovation, about changing the world. He was trying to brazen it out, to use his immense charisma to make the truth itself seem like a lie. Reporters were already shouting questions, but he ignored them. "And I am thrilled to announce," he said, raising his voice, "that we have secured a new round of anchor funding that—" That's when Robbie stood up. "Mr. Sterling," he shouted, his voice cutting through the room. "Robert Chen from the New York Chronicle. Is it true that the Helios project has experienced over a dozen containment breaches due to salt crystallization, a fact you deliberately omitted from your SEC filings? The room erupted. Sterling's smile tightened. We don't respond to baseless allegations from failing newspapers. Then maybe you'll respond to a primary source, Robbie shouted back. He looked at Maya and nodded. This was the moment. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to stand. All the cameras in the room swiveled towards her. The men at the exits tensed, but they couldn't make a move in front of hundreds of witnesses. Sterling stared at her. For a split second, his mask of composure slipped. His eyes widened in disbelief and fury. He couldn't believe she would have the audacity to show up here. Mr. Sterling, Maya said, her voice shaking but clear. She didn't need a microphone. The silence in the room was absolute. My name is Maya Rodriguez. We met at the Gilded Compass. You tried to have my boss fire me. She let that hang in the air for a moment, then turned her gaze to Mr. Tanaka. She bowed her head respectfully, and then began to speak in fluent, powerful Japanese. Tanaka-sama, kono hito wa anata ni uso wo tsuita. だけでなく私に賄賂を渡そうとし私の命を脅かしました。Mr. Tanaka, this man not only lied to you, he tried to bribe me, and he threatened my life. She held up a small USB drive, a copy of the one from Nevada. これが証拠です。ヒリオスプロジェクトが失敗であることを示す彼の内部報告書。This is the proof. His own internal reports, showing the Helios project is a failure. A gasp went through the Japanese delegation. Mr. Tanaka rose slowly to his feet, his eyes fixed on Sterling. The cameras flashed, capturing the silent, devastating judgment on his face. Dominic Sterling stood frozen on the stage, the spotlight shining on him. His smile was gone, replaced by the pale, slack-jawed expression of a man who had just watched his entire world burn down around him on live television. The king was naked, his empire exposed, as a fraud not by a rival corporation or a government agency, but by a waitress he had deemed invisible. The trap had been sprung, and he was the one caught inside it. The press conference devolved into chaos, as reporters surged towards the stage, shouting questions at the stunned Dominic Sterling federal agents from the SEC and the FBI, who had clearly been alerted by Robbie's article, entered the auditorium. They quietly and efficiently made their way to the stage. The confrontation was brief and subdued. They showed Sterling a warrant, and the billionaire visionary, the man on the magazine covers, was calmly escorted off the stage and out a side door, his face a pale mask of ruin. The cameras captured it all. Gavin Price was intercepted and detained near an exit, his composure finally cracking as he was read his rights. In the ensuing storm, Maya and Robbie slipped out a back entrance. The cool city air felt shockingly fresh. The adrenaline that had sustained Maya for days began to drain away, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its place. It was over. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The fall of Origen Innovations was swift and spectacular. Its stock plummeted to zero and was delisted. The revelations from the Helios papers, as the media dubbed the contents of the USB drive, triggered multiple investigations. Lawsuits from shareholders who had been duped for years piled up. Dominic Sterling, facing charges of securities, fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy, was released on a historic bail. His assets frozen, his empire dismantled. Maya became an unwilling celebrity. Her face was everywhere. News outlets clamored for interviews offering her huge sums of money. She turned them all down. She wasn't a hero or a whistleblower in her own mind. She was just someone who had done what was right, haunted by the memory of her father's loss. She gave her official testimony to the FBI, handing over the original USB drive, and walking them through every detail she remembered. Her fluency in Japanese and her precise memory of the fraudulent contract made her the prosecution's star witness. A month after the press conference, she received a formal letter on heavy cream-colored stationery embossed with the logo of the Tanaka Corporation. It was a personal invitation from Mr. Kenji Tanaka to meet him for tea at his hotel. She went nervous and unsure what to expect. She found him not in a stuffy boardroom, but in a quiet suite overlooking Central Park. He greeted her with a deep, respectful bow. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, speaking in Japanese. "Once again you have my deepest gratitude. Your courage saved my company from a catastrophic error, but more than that, your integrity was a light in a very dark room." They talked for over an hour. He didn't ask about the investigation. He asked about her studies in Kyoto, her family, her dreams of being an interpreter. "A person of your character and skill should not be pouring water for men like Dominic Sterling," he said finally. He slid a business card across the table. "The Tanaka Corporation is expanding its U.S. operations. We need a liaison, a consultant who understands both American and Japanese culture and language at the deepest level. Someone we can trust implicitly. The position is yours if you would have it." He named a salary that made Maya's head spin. But it was his next words that struck her heart. "Your role would be to ensure clarity and honesty in all our cross-cultural dealings," he said. "To make certain that a promise is never again twisted into a lie. We need someone to ensure we always know exactly what it says." Tears welled in Maya's eyes. It was more than a job offer. It was a restoration. It was the life she was supposed to have, the career she had dreamed of offered back to her, not by chance, but earned through her own courage. She accepted. Dominic Sterling's trial was a media sensation, but he never took the stand. Faced with the mountain of evidence against him, including testimony from a dozen former employees emboldened by the scandal, he took a plea deal 15 years in a federal prison. Robbie Chen won a Pulitzer Prize for his investigation, the highest honor in journalism. His article became a case study in corporate accountability. Maya Rodriguez never had to serve another overpriced meal again. She moved into a bright apartment with a view of the city, helped her parents finally achieve financial security, and re-enrolled in school to complete her master's degree, her tuition fully paid for, by her new employer. Her work with the Tanaka Corporation took her around the world, from boardrooms in Tokyo to offices in London. She became known for her sharp intellect, her linguistic grace, and her unshakable integrity. She was no longer a ghost of Kyoto or an invisible waitress. She was a bridge between worlds, a guardian of the truth. Sometimes, late at night in a quiet hotel room far from home, she would think back to that moment in the gilded compass, the water pitcher in her hand, her heart hammering in her chest. She had been faced with a choice to be silent and safe, or to speak and risk everything. In choosing to speak, she hadn't just exposed a criminal. She had reclaimed her own voice, and in doing so, had rewritten her entire future. And she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that she would make the same choice again every single time. And so, a $500 million lie was shattered by one young woman's integrity. Maya Rodriguez's story is a powerful reminder that you don't need to be a CEO or a politician to change the world. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to speak the truth, even when your voice is shaking. It shows that true power isn't about wealth or status. It's about character. In a world full of Dominic Sterlings who rely on us being too intimidated or too distracted to look closely, Maya's actions challenge us all to pay attention to trust our instincts and to never underestimate the impact a single brave voice can have. What did you think of Maya's incredible story? Do you think you would have had the courage to do what she did? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you were inspired by this story of justice and bravery, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true stories that will leave you breathless. Thanks for listening.